Chapter 4. The Curse of the Mummy's Tomb. Not-Sheba and Frank walked into a long, narrow room and stood looking about them. Frank said, "I've really got to do this worksheet, you know, or I'm for it. If Mr. Butcher catches me wandering about like this, I don't know what would happen." "Don't you like walking with me?" said Not-Sheba in a teasing sort of voice. Frank blushed and looked the other way. More chairs, more tables, more blue rope. But where was everybody? Where was the rest of his class, and what was that noise? "Did you hear that?" said Frank. "Oh, I hear everything," said Not-Sheba. "That's all I've done for years. Hear everything." "No, did you hear that creaking noise?" said Frank. "Oh, everything creaks around here," said Not-Sheba. Frank looked towards where he thought the creak was coming from. It came from another part of the room, cordoned off with the blue ropes. There, instead of old chairs and tables, were little statues. Frank walked slowly and carefully towards the rope and read the labels. There was a Chinese goose and an ancient Egyptian cat. There were bits of... Then the creak happened again. Sounded like wood being split, a hard, vicious sort of noise, right close by. Frank stepped back and looked around for Not-Sheba. She'd gone. "Hey, where are you?" Frank called out. "You've got my worksheet." The creak creaked again. "What's going on?" Frank called out again. "Not-Sheba, where are you?" He suspected a plot. Not-Sheba is maybe ganging up with some nutter who's smashing the place up, and they're in with Mr. Butcher, who's going to tell my mum. Out of the corner of his eye, Frank saw a hand waving. It was coming from the great, wide fireplace. A hand was poking down the chimney and waving. Frank felt horrible. He just stared at the hand. Now he realised whose hand it was. Not-Sheba's. She had dashed off to hide and had wedged herself upside down halfway up the chimney. She poked her upside down halfway up the chimney, and she poked outwards, saying, "Quick, over here," she said. Frank tiptoed backwards and joined her. What does she know that I don't? Why is she so sure that it was such a good idea to rush off and hide? "What's going on?" whispered Frank. There was a pause. She doesn't want to tell me, he thought. It's a trick. The whole thing's a trick. I should never have gone along with this crazy business of trying to find out her name. "What's going on?" said Frank again to the upside-down head. "I don't know," said Not-Sheba. She's lying, thought Frank. The creak creaked loud and hard. Frank was sure he saw something move this time. It came from the Chinese goose. Or was it the cat? Not-Sheba groaned. "Oh, no." "What's the matter?" said Frank. "I'm scared," said Not-Sheba. "You're scared?" said Frank. "You've lived here for hundreds of years, haven't you?" "Well, I've never been here in my life, and any minute now Mr. Butcher's going to find me, and I'm done for." "Have you any idea what kind of trouble I'm in?" hissed Not-Sheba, still upside down. "When they find I'm not behind the table with Miss Charlotte and Master William, her ladyship's going to come for me with the end of her broom and beat me and then lock me in a room for a week." For one split second, Frank found himself wondering why on earth Not-Sheba was worried about some weird stuff to do with Miss This and a Master That, and not so bothered about the horrible noise. Then, creak! There it was again. It wasn't the goose or the cat. It was the mummy. The Egyptian mummy behind the cat. Frank and Not-Sheba moved closer together and stared as the mummy slowly cracked open like an egg. Is that a hatching chick inside? The wood splintered and creaked. From the dark inside, there was movement. First a hand, then an arm pushed its way out. It was grey and bandaged. Frank turned away. This is horrible. But why isn't Not-Sheba bothered? Is she in on this? Her head disappeared back up the chimney. Frank glanced back towards the mummy. The front of the mummy's case fell to the floor. It shook and dust flew up. A moment later, out of one half of the case, stepped a shrivelled, stained body bound round with a few strips of dark cloth. The face was bony and shrunken, the bones pushing through the skin, the mouth clammed up into an unsmiling grin. The movements were stiff and jerky, and the head couldn't turn at the neck. Instead, the whole body inched around with a sound like the blade of a knife being scraped across a plate. It's seen me, said Frank to himself. And it had. I know, I've seen this in a late-night film on TV. Now, what happens next is, I remember, it comes for me because of, the Pharaoh's curse on all grave robbers. It's going to stagger towards me while the music goes, eat, eat, eat. Frank whispered up the chimney. It's coming for me, Not-Sheba. This is where it strangles me. I've seen the film. The moment Frank said that, the mummy groaned. Oh! It was now only a few feet away, and Frank could smell its sweet, musty body, a kind of ghastly, meaty, sad groan. Oh! Did you say film? Said the mummy. Yes, sir, said Frank. I knew it, said the mummy. I knew it. What did you know, sir? Said Frank, playing for time before the moment when the mummy's fingers would reach out for his throat and squeeze the breath out of him, and he would fall to the floor with a thud. You're the man for me, said the mummy. Yes, I know that as well, sir, said Frank. This is where you strangle me before you climb back into your tomb. I've seen it. You've seen it? You've seen it? I knew it. You're my man. The worksheet, Mr. Butcher, Mrs. Morell waiting at the coach, all slipped from Frank's head. The end was coming. He didn't have to worry any more whether he was for the scrap heap, the dung heap, or any old heap. He didn't have to worry about this weird girl he was with. He'd be found, stone dead, strangled on the floor of Chiltern House next to the mummy's tomb, the Pharaoh's curse still working. Frank calmed himself for the end. He knew that as the mummy's hands closed around his throat, he would raise his own hands to the mummy's arms in an attempt to wrench them off him. But the grip would be too strong. It would be the iron grip of 3,000 years of fate. The mummy's face jerked near, and Frank could see each stained tooth right around the jaw. It was about to speak to him. Yes, Frank thought, this is where it screams. The Pharaoh's curse lives on! Can you get me a part? It said. What? Said Frank. Can you get me a part? He said it again. A part of what? Said Frank. A part in the film, it said. I don't know, said Frank. This bit wasn't in the film, he knew. The mummy in the film he watched that night didn't talk about a film when it was actually in a film. I want to be the mummy in the film, said the mummy. I want the part. Believe me, I can act. I know I look a bit stiff, but that'd be right for the part, wouldn't it? Please, please. I don't make films, said Frank. I mean, I'm sure you'd be great, but I'm just a kid. Don't try to be funny with me. Don't try to be funny with me, kid. I never try to be funny, sir, said Frank. It just comes out that way sometimes. I mean business, said the mummy. For years and years, I've been locked up in there listening to people walking past, yeah, and laughing at me, talking about the great mummy films I remind them of. The Curse of the Mummy's Tomb, The Mummy Rises Again, The Mummy's Shroud. I listen and I remember and I listen, and now that I'm finally out, I want a bit of the action. I suppose it's Tutankhamun who gets all the parts, isn't it, eh? He always did have more fun than me. Well, now it's my turn, my break. And you, kid, you're going to put me in your movie or you're finished. Frank could see it wasn't going to be much use trying to explain to the mummy that he didn't really make films. In fact, it wasn't going to be much use trying to explain anything or say anything to the mummy. I want the fame, I want the fame, I want the glory. It was shouting now. I want to be the one who steps onto that stage with the whole world watching to collect my Oscar. I want to be the one to make the witty speech and collect my little Oscar statue. I want to be given it by someone who the whole world knows, like Madonna or Adolf Hitler. I don't think Adolf Hitler is alive anymore, said Frank. Well, Cleopatra then, said the mummy. Right, said Frank. Best not to argue, he thought. You got it, said the mummy, so get me the part, okay? Okay, said Frank. Now what have I let myself in for, he thought. First I get myself stuck with some hopeless hunt for someone's name. And now I'm supposed to be a film director making horror films. Now we're talking business, said the mummy. Yeah, said Frank. What shall I call you then? Charlie, said the mummy. Wasn't he a great man in movies? Charlie Chappie. Was it Charlie Chaplin or something? Yeah, said Frank. He was brilliant. And just to test the mummy, he said, you look like him as well. I thought so, said the mummy. Not-Sheba put her head down the chimney. Can I be in the film as well? Oh, yeah, of course, said Frank, amazing himself at the way he was talking. Who's this? Said Charlie the mummy. Not-Sheba, said Frank. Not the Queen of Not-Sheba, said Charlie. From the great movie, Solomon and Not-Sheba, starring Yul Brynner, directed by King Vidor. Frank glanced at Not-Sheba to see how she would take this, but she was too busy staring at Charlie's horrible face. Then suddenly she realised who it was. Yeah, the mummy. They had called out to each other on occasions on long, lonely winter nights. But she had no idea that he looked like this, and of course he didn't know that her name was Not-Sheba. Well, Not-Sheba. Anyway, now she was getting confused herself. Charlie didn't seem to be bothered to know that she was the girl in the picture who had talked to him sometimes, and he didn't wait for the answer to his question either. That's great, he said. What a lineup. Not-Sheba and Charlie Chaplin the mummy. This is going to be a great movie. Frank! A man's loud voice shouted out, followed by a thudding, clanging noise. Boom, clink, boom, clink. Oh no, it's Mr. Butcher, said Frank, and I haven't done anything for my worksheet. Quick, give it back to me, Not-Sheba. No, said Not-Sheba, we haven't got anywhere towards finding out my name yet. Frank glanced at Charlie, wondering if he was trying to follow this conversation. He hadn't heard. He was too busy rehearsing The Mummy Rises Again by rising again and again all over the place. Then Mr. Butcher strode into the room. Well, It looked like Mr. Butcher, except he wasn't wearing his usual brown jacket and black trousers. Is that him? Mr. Butcher himself in a suit of armour, with a sword in his hand? "Frank!" bellowed the man in a familiar voice, and waved the sword. "Oh, I know what this means," said Not-Sheba. "Quick, let's run for it." And she dropped herself down the chimney. Charlie, the mummy, looked round and stared. He seemed to know too. "Oh no," he said. "I'll follow you two," said Frank, as Not-Sheba and Charlie started running off. The clanking Mr. Butcher person, sword in hand, strode after them. Clank, thud, clank, thud. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the story about Frank's adventures at the stately home. Maybe the next time you visit a museum or stately home, you'll be able to look at the objects on display there and wonder where they came from and what their story is. You might want to write your own story inspired by them. Frank also appears in You're Thinking About Doughnuts, which you can find here on Kids Poems and Stories with Michael Rosen. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel. Just click on the bell to keep updated with all the latest vids that we post here.